Welcome to the Boxing Gossip channel. Please hit subscribe if you are new. I have pressed record on this video immediately after the conclusion of the 10th round in Okolie versus Isaac Chamberlain. I haven't seen any of what will take place after the final bell. I haven't seen the scorecards read out. One of the rare occasions I'll start recording a post-fight video before the scorecards read out. I don't think we're going to see anything other than an extremely one-sided decision in favour of Okolie. So I've got the skybox on pause and I thought I'd talk to you guys and come back to that a little bit later. I'm going to be honest and say it how I see it. This was an extremely disappointing fight. A really dull fight that failed to catch fire and really was disappointing considering the pre-fight build-up and pre-fight hype. There was a complete lack of clean punches landed. There was a complete lack of boxing, and it really looked like two raw novices in there fighting at a level that I would say resembled below British title level. You know, I know that may sound harsh, but that's my honest take based on what we've seen in there today. Quite frankly, I would say this was more a wrestling competition than a boxing fight. You know, both guys had points deducted for holding. In the first round, Okolie pushes Isaac Chamberlain to the floor like that. You know, the whole fight was a case of the referee getting between, splitting up the two guys and trying to get them to box. And then it went back to holding and wrestling almost immediately after. Okolie, the much bigger man, the more powerful man, the stronger, more physical specimen. He had big advantages in the fight because of his size and because of his strength. Chamberlain went down twice in the fight. Now, the first time he goes down in round one, I'm not sure a punch lands. You know, I've looked back on it. Sky commentators seem to be insisting a punch was landing. I couldn't see a punch land from Okolie whatsoever. So I don't know if Isaac Chamberlain has slipped. I don't know what's happened. I didn't see him protest too much. Maybe I've just missed it, but I didn't see a punch land. Later on in the fight, maybe rounds 6, 7, something like that, I think it might have been round 7, Okolie does land a right hand, but if you watch it back in slow-mo, even that is a cuffing right hand that sort of catches the side of Isaac Chamberlain, and he doesn't really go down. His glove sort of touched the canvas, which I appreciate is a knockdown. But it's a scrappy, messy fight. Okolie has pretty much won every round for me. You know, he's going to win this by 10 points, maybe 11, 12 points, because, you know, he's got two 10-8 rounds in the first two rounds, one with the knockdown and then obviously the point deduction for Chamberlain in the second, and then he's got a 10-8 round, yeah, round 7 as well. So Okolie's going to win this by 10 points, I'm sure. But for me, it was an extremely disappointing performance from Okolie, despite the fact he was, you know, so dominant in the fight. I thought he had a complete lack of adjustment in the fight. You know, for me, Okolie, what he needed to do was keep this fight at range, keep this fight at distance. He was by far at his most dangerous when he could throw his punches from range, when he could get full extension on his arms. But what did he do? He kept allowing the fight to get up this close. He led consistently. How many times did we see him lead? 50 times with this sort of bizarre, low uppercut punch that he kind of threw and jumped in behind. I mean, you don't really tend to see that in professional boxing. The commentators were saying, oh, he's unorthodox, oh, he's awkward. I was kind of looking at it just thinking, he's a novice who doesn't really know what to do. You know, he's literally standing 5 foot away from Isaac Chamberlain, exactly where he wants to be to start trying to get a jab and a cross off, and he is jumping from outside the pocket to inside the pocket with this sort of uppercut hook hybrid punch that was largely ineffective throughout the course of the fight. It brought him immediately back into range where Chamberlain was able to tie him up again and, you know, bring the fight back to that wrestling match. The Okolie jab just wasn't there. If you're the bigger man, the much bigger, rangier man who wants to keep the fight at distance, he was throwing the jab, but he only ever threw the jab to tee up the right hand. You know, I wanted to see him commit to the jab. He could do with what's his son Vladimir Klitschko, you know, how you commit to that jab when you're the bigger, stronger man and use that as a battering ram, keep your opponent off you. You know, he really didn't do that. Chamberlain, for me, he was in sparring partner mode. We may come on to that in a second, but what Chamberlain was doing in the early part of the fight is every time Lawrence went to throw that big right hand, Chamberlain kind of ducked and just went down to the side. So Chamberlain, you know, sees the right hand coming. It was fairly telegraphed, and he kind of goes in like this, and Lawrence just falls in behind the right hand, and then instantly the two guys are wrestling again. You know, Lawrence Okolie didn't appear to appreciate that every time he was throwing that, Chamberlain was ducking and turning. What he could have done is brought the punch down to anticipate that. What he could have done is tried not to fall in behind the punch so much to try and keep the range. He could have stuck out a double jab, but there just wasn't that. You know, I don't think he threw a single double jab in the entire fight. He was throwing that right hand, falling in. He was jumping out from range with that uppercut, falling in, and it was Okolie's fault as much as Chamberlain's fault that the fight was so messy and so scrappy. You know, as for Isaac Chamberlain, we've heard all about this world-class sparring. He's had the likes of Usyk, the likes of Wilder. He showed some veteran tricks in there, but they were sparring partner tricks. They weren't tricks that were going to win him the fight. It was very, very disappointing. Chamberlain didn't really throw any punches of note until round 7 or 8. And by then, he'd had a point deducted. He'd had 2 10-8 rounds that he'd lost. And he'd probably lost every other round on the card as well, 10-9. He kind of threw caution to the wind a little bit rounds 7, 8, 9 and 10, certainly more so than he did, and tried to put some punches together. But the difficulty was he'd been so ineffective in the first half of the fight. He'd done so little. Lawrence Okolie's gas tank hadn't begun to empty at all, and Okolie was still a fresh fighter in rounds 7 and 8. Okolie hadn't really had to take 1 or 2 punches. You know, Okolie hadn't had his chin tested at all. You know, and at this point, Okolie had simply been the bigger man, ragdolling the smaller Isaac Chamberlain. So, you know, Isaac Chamberlain, if his tactic was to drag Okolie late and then drown him, he just didn't do enough early work to sort of start eroding Okolie's stamina. And to be fair, that is one of the bits of credit I will give Okolie in this fight. For such a big guy, for a guy who clearly has to cut weight to make cruiserweight, you know, he did appear to be very fit. He still looked relatively fresh in the final round, and that is something I give him plaudits for. He certainly was by far the better man in there tonight. He was the guy who was throwing the more spiteful punches. He looked like the guy who'd really, you know, come to fight. Chamberlain, I don't know if he was nervous. He seemed very nervous in the pre-fight build-up. Maybe there was a huge amount of nervous energy going on in there. Maybe he felt the power of Lawrence Okolie early and that put him in his cell. You know, I don't know. But for me, Chamberlain sort of drifted into sparring partner mode. He kind of, for me, resembled... You know, it was a kind of frustrating performance that resembled, like, I don't know, when David Allen fought Dillian White or Luis Ortiz. You know, you could see some smoothness and some slickness and some awareness in there. You could see some class, some sort of experience from those sparring scenarios, but there just wasn't the output to win. You know, there wasn't just enough output that made you at any point really start scoring rounds in favour of Isaac Chamberlain. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if Isaac Chamberlain didn't win a single round in the fight. Let's put it that way. You know, where do both guys go from here after this disappointing fight? Well, let's hope there's not a rematch, because I don't want to see that again. You know, Okolie, I'm not sure that will have done too much to build hype around him. You know, that could have put people to sleep at home. It certainly didn't put Isaac Chamberlain to sleep, but it almost put the people watching at home to sleep. He's still very raw, very green. For me, he needs to work on his fundamentals, needs to work on the jab, needs to work on being a bit less predictable, needs to work on falling in a bit less behind his shots. He has eradicated some of the wide swings that we saw early on in his career, and that's to his benefit. You know, I was worried a year ago when people were talking about this fight that he would swing in wide and Chamberlain would be able to counter him. You know, that didn't happen. Chamberlain wasn't doing any countering, it was just spoiling. You know, but Okolie for me is still quite a long way off where he's going to need to be if he wants to start thinking about, you know, British titles or European titles or anything like that. He has got weapons, he's got power, he's got strength, he's got size. You know, so we'll see how Okolie gets on. As for Isaac Chamberlain, it's a tough road back after this. You know, it is a tough road back after this. He probably won't have gained too many fans tonight. You give him an element of, you know, heart and durability for the fact that he's been down in round 1. He was clearly nervous. It was clearly a huge step up against a much bigger man and a bigger puncher, and he's lasted the distance. But really, he just hasn't put enough punches out there to do himself justice in the fight for my money. So it's a hard road back for Chamberlain. His style isn't going to appreciate to the casuals, and you wonder sort of what direction his career will go on from here. For me, without being, I don't really want to put the boot in, but this was a very, very average performance from both guys. And, as I say, I think both of them are actually a good bit away from British title level, even after this fight. Okolie certainly the more promising of the two based on this performance. Let me know your thoughts, guys. Leave your comments in the section below. If you've enjoyed this content, please hit the thumbs up button. If you're new to the channel, you haven't already done so, do take the time to subscribe. As always, appreciate you tuning in.